Hello, everyone. Welcome back to St. Louis Teens. We are here today with Professor Rosabeth Kanter, who is the Ernest L. Arbuckle Professor at Harvard Business School, specializing in strategy, innovation, and leadership for change. Professor Kanter has authored or co-authored 20 books, and her most recent is Think Outside the Building: How Advanced Leaders Can Change the World One Smart Innovation at a Time. Professor Kanter is a former chief editor of Harvard Business Review and has repeatedly been named to lists of the 50 most powerful women in the world, the 50 most influential business thinkers in the world, and is now in the Thinkers 50s Hall of Fame. Professor Kanter, you are instrumental in the founding of Harvard's Advanced Leadership Initiative, and you work to educate and prepare successful top leaders to apply their skills to national and global challenges. Thank you so much for your phenomenal service, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Professor Kanter, thank you so much. Can you tell us a little bit about what drove you to the field of social leadership, and what is the most favorite part about your journey and work?
So it started back when I was a teen, or maybe even before that. Probably before that. For some reason, hard to know, I always felt that my voice mattered and that what I had to say, people should listen to. So that was one thing. And that was not a time, it's more so now, but that was not a time where people listened to a lot of girls. So young and female, but I somehow believed, maybe it was my family, I don't know, but there I was, because I can remember the things that I was doing, even as a preteen, including when I was 11. I usually don't tell many personal stories because they get all over the web, but this one already is all over the web. That when I was 11, with a friend who lived on my same street, we decided we would write a teen mystery story, and we would write the book. And we only completed half of it, but every time, I've lost the book at the moment, I have to find it. But every time I showed it to other 11 or 12-year-olds, they said, hey, this is really good. I don't know why we thought we could do that. I like to speak. I got a chance to speak. So finding voice was the first thing. The second thing, to answer your question, is that personally, I was always fascinated by that world. You're showing a globe behind you. I was always fascinated by how things connect. Not just one thing, but how it connected to lots of other things. And in fact, there was a set of books that I don't know if I had them when I was a child, but I was fascinated by Richard Scarry, who would show like everything going on in the street at the same time. All the trucks, all the buses, all the cars, all the people. And I just loved that idea of the whole system. So I had to study the whole system. I had to understand what was going on beyond my little world. So finding voice, a lot of curiosity about the whole system drove me.
And from your experience preparing experienced leaders to transition from primary income earning years to community and public service for the next years of their life, how do you think we can bring that education to teens and youth who are starting out now, just like you did so early, so that they incorporate the sense of purpose and community into their growth and career?
So excellent question. And absolutely, I think this is more a young person's game. The reason that we did it for people later in life was because there was a growing demographic that showed that they were living so much longer after so-called retirement, although I hate the R word, because people don't really retire now. They have a portfolio. Just as you have a portfolio as a team leader and others have a portfolio, you do more than one thing. So the reason we did that group was because it was an obvious opportunity. And besides that, many of them were affluent. And so they could fund this and we could demonstrate the need and we could start something totally new. But as far as I'm concerned, a lot of the passion and the idealism comes from young people. In fact, I think there are two ages in life when you're more likely to want to start a social venture and change the world or change the street corner you live on. And that is, later in life, after your kids are grown, but early in life, before you've settled on a career, when you still feel free, when you still can explore, before you have a boss saying, no, you work in investment banking, as a lot of young college graduates now do. And they say, no, you've got to be here like 20 hours a day. You don't have the same amount of time. So young people have the time, they have the idealism. You have the idealism. I mean, survey after survey says that young people know the world can be better than it is, want to inherit a world that's better, and are willing to do something about it. Now, if you put those two groups together, because the young people have the idealism, don't have experience necessarily, and don't have the resources. But imagine the magic that can occur if the people later in life who have the resources, they may or may not have the imagination, but they also have experience. That combination working together is just perfect. So I'm not telling everybody to find your grandparents, but I'm saying that there are people out there who would like to know what you're doing. In fact, I know some in St. Louis.
And in your latest book, Think Outside the Building, How Advanced Leaders Can Change the World One Smart Innovation at a Time, you talk about collaboration as a big necessity for social impact. And speaking about how young leaders now can get connected with individuals with more experience, how do you think young leaders can collaborate with experienced leaders, corporations, and even the government to bring about that desired change?
That is so important. I mean, collaboration is the only way you tackle big problems. I mean, they're not owned by any one entity. And if you don't collaborate, look what a mess you get. I mean, we're all living through the pandemic, and the first response was really a mess. There was no collaboration between national, state, private sector. In fact, the private sector started responding by forming a COVID response collaboration with about 1,000 companies, hospitals, others, coordinating to do things like making PPE. Well, I know young people who started ventures where they were making face masks, so you can play. And if somebody knows that you have the interest, they're always very interested because, sometimes they're a little patting you on the back. Isn't that adorable? But I think increasingly, they take young people seriously. They have to. And yet young people have to be open to the other generations. One of the secrets of Google's success, I think, is that Larry Page and Sergey Brin, when they started it, they were really young and they knew technology. They knew how to do a search engine. They didn't know much else. And they hired Eric Schmidt, a very experienced executive, much older, to be the CEO. And part of his job was to teach them. So you've got to know the limits of your own knowledge. You can't write off the older generations like, oh, they're clueless. And why weren't these problems solved before? They were too busy maybe raising you. I don't know. But I think there's a great deal of openness. I think they all love young people. That's why I'm doing this. I mean, you keep me young. My secret of longevity is that my friends keep getting younger and younger. And I believe in the ideas, but I also believe, there are a few things that we can all teach you.
Definitely. And I think, Professor Kanter, you have those extraordinary accounts of successes and near stumbles of purpose-driven leaders and entrepreneurs. Can you share with us the stories of inspiring young leaders and entrepreneurs that you say keep you young and that you've had the opportunity to work with?
Well, so, I mean, some of the people that I know and talk about were young once, as everybody was. So there are some people who are doing amazing things, amazing. So in Massachusetts, a friend of mine, I knew her from being on the board of the service organization, National Service Organization, City Year, which was the model for AmeriCorps. City Year is in Kansas City, not in St. Louis, but it's the youth corps. And so I love the people in the youth corps. I believed in the power of their voices. Everybody had to get up and give speeches, and they led service, and they're now having a big influence on public schools. Well, one person I met through that started her own organization, which appoints, with the governor loving it, appoints a youth ambassador from every one of the 351 cities and towns in our state. And each of them, are a service leader organizing events for the community. They're in 8th grade.
Wow.
So I now believe in the power of 8th graders. I realize brains are still developing, so there may be some things that aren't perfect, but there's a lot of idealism and can do. There are, and I think I mentioned her, but I know I mentioned others who started things that mobilize young people at amazingly young ages. I mean, organizing it is important. It's hard by yourself. I mean, in school, having classes, having authority figures who may or not believe in you, but it's amazing what kinds of things people can do. A young woman who won a Profiles in Courage Award from the John F. Kennedy Library had a venture, probably a little like your venture, in which she had created a kind of coat for homeless people that could double as a blanket.
Oh, wow.
And so that was a very creative idea. She liked to sew, and then she started training some of the women to make those, and they had a business. So, you know, it's small, it didn't spread across the country, it didn't take over from Patagonia, but it was a brilliant idea. And some of those things should scale. And I think there's a greater search for them. In fact, a friend of mine who has a significant venture capital firm, you know, and he gets to know my Harvard Business School students who are graduate students, but he's now saying, I've got to meet them even younger. Where are the high school students with a brilliant idea?
And I think all these opportunities now that you talk about that are really giving young individuals and youth an opportunity to get involved in this service and get involved in organizing some of these opportunities is so invaluable, especially at a young age when you're still growing. Being able to have that opportunity to do something like that early on is so incredible. And thank you so much. And thank you so much to everyone that you've worked with as well to be able to bring those, to the youth and to the teens.
Yeah, well, not every idea that people have is a brilliant idea. So I also find myself sometimes saying, no, do you want to rethink that? Will that really work? So you have to be open to the feedback. And that's where this idea of collaboration, not just across generations, but collaboration with your own friends who become allies, who help you move it forward. It is very hard to move a good idea for social impact forward by yourself. Very hard. You need a team, you need allies, you need supporters, and so finding them. So that's important too. And then it is possible, not guaranteed, but possible.
And as you talk about being open and making sure that you have that support system that's necessary, Professor Kanter, you state that innovation doesn't come from establishments that protect their way of doing things. How must higher education, as you say, be refreshed and reinvented?
Well, yeah, we have a lot of work to do in higher education too. But when I was thinking of establishments, I meant lots of things. I mean, hospitals. Health is not the hospital. As we've learned in the pandemic, I mean, hospitals are very, very important for acute care, but they get overwhelmed. And if we don't deliver health services to people in other places, so one of the people who had gone through my Harvard program has a number of efforts around the United States, many cities, but in particular in his home city of Baton Rouge. And one of them is a health program for African American males who don't really like going to the big hospitals or to doctor's offices or the emergency room. And this is a set of health services, screening services delivered in barber shops.
Oh, really?
Think about that. While getting your hair cut, you get your blood pressure taken. And they're doing education in the barbershops because that's where people will go. They mistrust the establishments. And not everybody mistrusts establishments. I mean, because some people benefit from being on the inside and having all that privilege. But so in order to get change, though, you have to move outside. So it's outside the building, outside the, I call them castles, the establishment, the way it's so rigid and it's hard to innovate. And so you have to do it from outside. And sure, higher education has to change. My program at Harvard used all my theories about how you get change, not by protesting on the streets, although sometimes that may be an important way to get attention to the cause, but you do it by innovating, by showing a model that's different. And so on the one hand, who start the prologue to my book, Think Outside the Building, is called How to Attack a Castle. So I've been accused of being kind of radical. At the same time, much of my advice can sound pretty moderate, even conservative. My advice is don't attack it head on, set up your alternative model, that protest, very important for expression and sometimes for finding allies, but it doesn't necessarily produce change. We had Occupy Wall Street a few years ago, great flurry of interest in let's get reform and lots of people camping out. Didn't really get reform because you need alternative models. So I want people to use their energy and brain power to find those alternative models and then figure out how to spread them. And if you're young and have the virtue of novelty, no one expects you to be doing what you're doing. You can get a lot of publicity. And free publicity is really good because it promotes your cause too. So yeah, I mean, I'm not answering directly what higher education needs to do, but higher education is such a big thing. I mean, my own institution, Harvard, is doing what we can to be more inclusive, equitable. We are renaming buildings, but we're doing more than that in our education. And we have learned fast about delivering education remotely to many people around the world. And then we do it individually as faculty. So even though it doesn't substitute for a campus, technology is a big driver of change. Soon I speak, for example, in Durban, South Africa. And during COVID, I've spoken in so many exotic places, beautiful places, exotic places in the Czech Republic, where else have I, the most exotic? I mean, Australia is not that exotic, but I've spoken a lot of places and I like the idea of Durban, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm standing in the same place I'm standing now. It just sounds exotic. So there's a possibility, as you're doing, of spreading education, spreading knowledge, developing common vocabularies, and then that's the wider system that will change. So it's not just your individual action or one program here, one program there. It's that whole system, everything that's happening on the street at the same time.
And some of the topics you talked about with the pandemic, the economic fallout, at our current crossroads of fighting these issues, the pandemic, the economic fallout, and the anti-racism movement, how can all of us rise to this crisis and speed up innovation and change?
So first of all, I do believe in speaking up. I mean, by itself, as I said, you have to do more than that. I did a TED Talk that has 6 secrets of successful leadership for change Number one is show up. Well, a little harder to show up in person now, but yeah, you gotta be there. You can show up on Zoom now and then show up. But the second is speak up. Um, make one's voice heard, and then look up, find a grand purpose, team up, get other people to go with you, never give up, and lift others up. So speak up, show up, show solidarity, be an ally, speak up, make these a part of the discussion. I'm writing a lot of op-eds and columns. I just wrote some things praising President Biden's infrastructure plan, because they are looking at infrastructure through a climate lens, through a racial equity lens, and through a gender lens by adding childcare. So if you have concern about these issues, just add them to the conversation is one thing. And then, of course, get involved. You could start your own organization, but I'm also worried about fragmentation. There are a lot of organizations worth joining. Everybody doesn't have to have their own. And I know that in the nonprofit and social impact area, people don't get paid, so they get a big title and they have their own organization. Well, we've got to get over that and cooperate and work together.
And in terms of speaking up and showing up, it's a large part of the journey. And I think it's so incredible how you've outlined some of those steps that are needed in order to become a successful leader. And one other thing that you sort of stated in terms of Cantor's Law, I'm a huge fan of Cantor's Law, which states that everything can look like a failure in the middle. And I can completely relate to this in several aspects of my life and ventures. I would like to ask, how do you help people overcome that state, particularly for those that are not giving up, but face the dilemma of should I change something or continue on the current path? And how can one predict and connect the dots forward?
Yeah, well, never give up is definitely an important leadership principle, and Cantor's Law that everything can look like a failure in the middle. So just say to yourself, it's the middle. Do we keep going? Do we persist? Or maybe we pivot a little, we do it a little differently. So how you know is, first of all, if you have been very sensitive to the context and you know that this is a problem worth solving, that you have a vision for what to do, if that vision still holds, keep going. But it's also possible that that vision's been superseded by events or somebody else is already doing it. So you got to check in about whether the vision is still viable. You have to ask yourself whether support is growing or declining. If support is growing, that's a good sign you should keep going. So you can check in on a few things, and then you think to yourself, well, we've hit some roadblocks that we didn't know were there because we've never been down that road before. And you ask, should we change something? And you can't be so rigid that you have to go with your original plan. Or say you put it in a paper for your high school history class that this is what you're going to do to change the future. And then you feel kind of stuck with that idea. Well, forget that. Start with that, but then be willing to modify your own idea, but do it with your allies, your supporters. Because if they care about this, they won't let you fail, but they will give you very big, very good feedback about what you might change. And so that's where you also might want a little adult supervision. You might want to go to experienced people and talk it over with them. That doesn't mean you're giving them the power to dictate it, but talk it over and listen to the advice.
And one of those roadblocks that often occurs, especially for young individuals, is funding. And I would say that with my project helping those facing homelessness start their own businesses, one of the biggest obstacles that I face is in terms of sustainability and raising funds. Can you share with us some of the innovative ways of funding and self-sustainability that you have seen from your experience?
So first of all, you have in your initiative, you have built in a funding model. That is, if they start businesses, they get some revenue, a portion of it should pay back your cost. And first of all, that provides even greater dignity for people because most people do not want to be the objects of charity. They want to make things happen for themselves. So help them start businesses where they owe a little bit back. That's one source of funding. So a revenue model. And many of the things that I write about in Think Outside the Building, my book about experienced leaders and what they do have a revenue model. They do have something that somebody will pay for. So you might ask, who would pay for the information about the kinds of businesses homeless people think about starting? Who would pay to have homeless people be more self-sufficient? Well, governments might pay. There might be some people interested in impact investing who would pay. So you ask yourself, is there somebody to whom this is valuable? And then your third is, the rally, the marketing, the charitable donation, the event where you tug on people's heartstrings and get them to give. But those are a couple of things. And of course, for young people, I realize that people grow up in many different life circumstances, but if you have parents and grandparents, go to them because entrepreneurs in general raise most of their really early money from friends and family. So don't forget them.
Well, definitely. And I think that advice is so valuable, not just to my initiative, but all the young individuals out there who may already have initiatives, who may or might be looking to start something new. So definitely thank you for that advice as well. I know that'll definitely be very valuable. Professor Kanter, I would like to also ask, what would your advice be for teens and youth and how we can be social leaders and be agents of change just like yourself?
So, well, you are, and I think I started to answer that in the beginning. Pick an area you care about, and it may be something that you know about from school, from your church, synagogue, mosque. It may be something that other people are talking about. It may be something that's happening in your neighborhood. I mean, it may be that your street could use a cleanup and that cleanup would help reduce crime because people would take more pride in what you're doing. So you start with something you care about, and it can be small and it can be close to home. You might talk about it. Let's say you do the street cleanup. You can talk about it as combating climate change if you want. You can talk about it as reducing crime in the city. You should have a grand goal and a big dream. But the practical side is that you're doing something very manageable, very small in your neighborhood, and you're getting the city council person for your neighborhood interested enough, and the local newspaper, they're not papers anymore, but the local news outlet interested in you. And you get lots of allies and support that way. And if you pick something small and manageable, you'll get it done. So my book is called Think Outside the Building, but the subtitle is called How Advanced Leaders Can Change the World, One Smart Innovation at a Time. Something small and smart, that's the beginning.
Professor Kanter, thank you so much for your amazing contributions and service to humanity. And thank you so much for your time today and answering all of our questions.
My pleasure. Sri, good luck to you.